everyone. How are we doing? Very good. That's the coffee working then. Today, I want to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. You might have seen me at a conference before. I speak a lot on this topic. And today, I want to really take a step back, not really focus on, here's a code example, here's how you can get started, but more, how can we build a culture, and how can we make sure that accessibility is a thing we can do at the company we work at and the companies we will work at in the future. And obviously, this doesn't just happen. It's not magic. And so what we are going to take a look at today is one step at a time. It will take time, but we'll get there. Why do we do this? Why do we do this? Why do we do accessibility? And I think it's because, a lot of people come to me when, they say, oh, we want to do accessibility at a company, but it's only a percentage of the user base, and we need to pitch it to management, etc. But it's not really about that. I think it's way more black and white. And what I mean with that is, imagine a person, a friend, a family member, or maybe yourself, where you can't use your favorite app because it isn't accessible and you have that need. You can't use Spotify, you can't listen to your music, you can't keep in touch with your friends over iMessage. It's really about this individual making people individually capable of using your app, of using your product. And that's why it's so important. It's not about 1%, it's about those users. And with that, accessibility kind of becomes a you problem. And then I mean engineers and designers and everyone that's here in the audience. We have to figure out how to solve this. Or rather, that makes it that accessibility is an us problem. It's an us problem. Everyone in the audience can contribute to improving their apps. And you can, and hopefully will, make that difference. We can get that higher in buy-in and help, but in the end, it's still us that do it. So, where do we start? And that's a good question that, unfortunately, I don't really have an answer to, because it's not that straightforward. And I believe that a lot about what makes accessibility hard is that we don't know what we don't know. And I think a lot of that comes back to being educated on accessibility and living accessibility and getting that understanding, but we have to kind of start somewhere. And so, talking about starting somewhere, what we can and what we should do is planting seeds. That's this presentation for all of you, I hope, unless you are already deep into accessibility, in which case, great. Those first few improvements you'll make to make accessibility better, and then sharing them with your team, or online, or whatever you come up with. So we could start with labels, something you might have heard of when it comes to accessibility. One of the ways to use accessibility, or one assistive tech, is VoiceOver, Apple Screen Reader, and we'll make sure that everything is labeled so that my close button will pronounce close and not XNG underscore I123.png. And that's a valiant effort. But labels aren't just a silver bullet that will resolve all of accessibility. And maybe some things should not be labeled, as we might see further on in this presentation. But it's a good start to kind of get a feeling of, hey, what can I do to start improving our app's accessibility? All right, so maybe not run off with labels. Let's take a step back. How can we make accessibility accessible? How can we overcome what we don't know? And I want to give you a few pointers, trying out some assistive technologies and getting a better understanding of how you can use them, how you can explore them, and how you can kind of take advantage of them to show your team and to help your development process even. Apple has an assistive technology they call voice control. And what it allows you to do is to navigate an app by voice. And for that, the aforementioned labels come into play. So we see here the weather app, and we see some details. And we can navigate with all these labels we see on screen. You can turn those off as well, because they can be quite annoying. But they're also a great thing, because we can turn this on to get an idea of what do the labels in our app look like. Where do we have things that are unlabeled where they shouldn't be? Where do we have 12345.png and fix them? Having said that, note that not every label will be the exact same as what you want for a screen reader. And actually the one up top, I don't know if you can read it, but it says something like activate or like double tap to dismiss this modal, which is actually not great because you would have to say double tap to dismiss this modal. And it's actually a voice over optimized label that should be ideally optimized for voice control. I filed a radar for this a long time ago, but anyway. And then we can use go back to perform an escape, as we can also do in VoiceOver. So if we say go back, we would pop back to the main screen of the weather app. Another thing that I think is really, really nice to use to get that feeling, to get an idea of what your labels in your app are like and what the accessibility might be like, or if you're doing a demo and you want to enhance like some text, is hover text. And this is a feature on macOS, and it is a really great tool to get this initial feeling of like what things are like, what things are labeled like. I actually use it quite a bunch if I have an icon that I see somewhere that I don't really understand because it doesn't have any text, which then sometimes lead to me discovering an accessibility bug, but obviously most often it can give me that information. So on the left, we have a good example where we hover over the close button and we see that it's properly labeled close. On the right, we have, another, I would say maybe good example, but something that probably shouldn't be an accessibility element because it's really just decorative, doesn't have a great label, and doesn't really provide any value. And so this is a really quick way to visualize and to understand, hey, we have those elements that might not need to be labeled. Note that with macOS, you have some great power, and you can actually sneak into the simulator. So if you have an iOS app and you built an app there, you can just sneak in with hover text into the simulator, check your iOS app there. Obviously, probably want to double check on device, but it's, again, a great way to get started. And you can set this up in System Settings, Accessibility, Zoom. And it uses a modifier key, so it won't interrupt you during your normal day, but if you need it, you can use it. Going back to Apple Screen Reader voice control, on the phone, what you can do is use the screen reader to navigate your phone by audio output. So this is used by people with low vision or blindness. And one cool thing is that you can turn on Caption Panel, which outputs exactly what VoiceOver outputs at the bottom of your screen. And you can use that to test without needing to wear headphones or without having to have the sound go through the office. I mean, who works in an office anymore? But regardless. And then you can also verify, hey, I heard that, but like, what was that actually? And you can see the exact output at the bottom. This slide is intentionally left blank, in case you were wondering, because, well, there's two reasons, really. And the first one is, I want you, if you want to, you can close your eyes, but I guess, it's already a blank slide. Close your eyes and think of a beautifully designed app, where you sweat over all the details, beautiful curves, rounded corners, beautiful colors, and everything. But now think of VoiceOver again, and imagine navigating this app just by speech output. And this is why this screen is intentionally left blank, because the screen reader VoiceOver has a feature called Screen Curtain. And whilst you use VoiceOver, you can use a 3-finger triple tap on the screen, and it will turn the screen off. First of all, that's privacy. For users that can't see, you don't really need to show that to other users, because you're not using the visual input anyway. On the other hand, it saves battery and resources that the system can use for other things. And that's a great way to try out your app and really see what it is like to live using an app, navigating an app, without being able to visually navigate it. Of course, this does not mean that you should not make beautiful apps because, obvious reasons. But it's a great way to kind of go that step beyond and figure out how it is to navigate an app with VoiceOver. Talking about VoiceOver and audio output, it's great to see that a lot of social media these days have a lot more emphasis on alt text. And if you post an image, there's a good chance that you have an option to add a description of that image, so that everybody can navigate and kind of take in that information. So don't forget that. All right, what else can we do? Well, we can use the accessibility inspector, which is a great tool built into Xcode that lets you navigate yet in another way your app and investigate its accessibility tree and inspect this information in the accessibility tree. And as you can see here, we navigated to a button in the Xcode app on the left, and on the right, we get this host of information about everything accessibility going on. That goes beyond the label. It goes into traits, it goes into values, it goes into a lot of other information, as you can see at the bottom. Other things we can do, especially when we work in a company with a team, is build good first accessibility issues. Antoine earlier today talked about quick wins. I think these are also a great way of doing quick wins. And what's great for having a backlog of those accessibility issues, good first accessibility issues, is, well, hopefully they aren't too critical and break your app, but they can be a great way to introduce someone new, whether that's a new team member onboarding or someone that hasn't really worked with accessibility yet, to get that first feeling, to get that first improvement making with accessibility, and get them excited and started off the right way. I think this is one of my favorite tips that I got over the last few years to demo with assistive tech. So at WeTransfer, we used to have these meetings called show and tell, and it was a way to kind of tell about a feature you worked on or a bug you crushed, or if it was more visual, you could show and kind of take users or take your colleagues through a new feature. And I've done that for a long time using only assistive technologies. We've seen VoiceOver, we've seen voice control, hover text, full keyboard access, loads to choose from. And what that did is it made it really clear what it is like to require this, to need this, to struggle using VoiceOver, to struggle using voice control. And especially if you do it with a before and after, if you've made a nice improvement somewhere, that can really kind of give that clarity of why this is important, why we should do this, and make it tangible and make it shareable again as well, right? So your colleague that might have picked up on it can then share it with another colleague in the future. talking about buy-in from higher-ups, again, I don't believe like that's really the goal, but obviously that's important. I think it's even more important to have sponsors and to have peers, and those can be in the form of higher-ups. But having other people that can help you do accessibility, or being able to have an Android colleague that might champion for you, can be really helpful. And you will need that help. You can't go and do this alone. And I hope you don't have to. So try to build that kind of network, whether that is within the company or maybe online, where you have people to talk to. I was really fortunate at WeTransfer to have Lena Ruiz, who does corporate social responsibility at WeTransfer. And she has been really helpful in just championing for me, making sure there's space to present in all hands, as well as working together to find partners that can level us up in accessibility. So talking about that, leveling up, finding partners, looking at the bigger picture, we rolled out training, working with a company to build a training that users could, or colleagues could take online. And it was tailored to our product. So you would actually get examples of real users relying on assistive technology, trying out an app that might not work perfectly. We did that for onboarding, we did office hours, and hopefully at one point we can also make this mandatory so that everyone can have those refreshers for accessibility, as well as when you onboard someone new, they can get started right away. Sometimes I wonder, really, what isn't accessibility? Because, you know, we've talked about all these assistive technologies, but really, what isn't? Localization? You bet that's accessibility. Makes it more accessible to a host of users that might not be familiar with just English. Dynamic type, being able to scale up your text to be bigger or smaller, that's accessibility. Autocomplete, so you don't have to like manually go and copy paste your password for someone else or the paper you wrote it on, accessibility. Dark mode, that's also accessibility. And I think this is also where it becomes great, because it kind of blurs the line of like what is accessibility and what isn't, which is great because accessibility makes better apps for everyone. Sensory feedback like haptics, also accessibility. Can you imagine Apple Pay without the sound or the haptics? That would be jarring, probably. That's a lot of stuff. And you might end up having trouble seeing the trees through the forest, as we say. You can't do all of this all in one go. But think of one, or maybe two of these things, and take that with you. And maybe take that with you into the design phase of your app, whether that's working indie or working with your designers. And talking about the design phase, when we want to scale up accessibility, at some point we want to shift left, as we call it. Maybe design can help you and figure out labels for elements, can figure out traits or roles that indicate that something is a button or a summary element. Maybe they can think of the priority of how you should navigate your app, because it might not always be from top left to bottom right. And what that helps with is sharing the workload of accessibility, sharing the knowledge of accessibility, sharing the energy, the mental energy that it takes to make an accessible product. And I think it can make that weakness of everything relying on one person or a group of people a strength. It's all easier said than done. So maybe we don't just do it right, but we don't do it wrong. And what I mean with that is, if you don't know exactly how to get it right, at least take one step, try. Don't try to get it wrong. Don't just leave out and leave that image with a bogus label. You probably know that text sizes should be able to grow or shrink, so try that out. And one thing that you might be able to do to help with this is imagine that you are explaining something over the phone to a friend and say, hey, you know, go to the system settings app. That's the icon with the cog. And then you say, hey, but that cog icon might need a cog input label. So, like, really what I'm saying is don't build that car with all those vague buttons that nobody knows what they do and a lot of touchscreen interface that we don't really want in our cars. Another thing that I think is crucial is to talk to your users. Because once you go from not knowing what you don't know to knowing a lot about accessibility, you might build up a mental model of how to make an app accessible. Or maybe you take a look at the web content accessibility guidelines that are kind of the guidelines for accessibility, and you check off all the boxes. And that's a great start, but that doesn't mean your app is accessible and your experience is accessible. So try to find users and work with users that rely on assistive technology. Because we can have the best things in mind, but does that really mean that we help the user that needs things most? They will give you super valuable feedback. And so one of the things we've done, because this has for a long time been like the trouble for me with accessibility, is where do we find these users? How do we get in contact with them? So at WeTransfer, we work together with a company called Fable, and they've been incredible to help us get access to users with these accessibility needs. So what they offer is we can basically schedule a call and say, hey, we've built this new feature, this new functionality, or we're designing something new, and we would love to test that with a user with VoiceOver. And then we would go through it and get that immediate feedback from those users. Apple Viz is another great resource. Luckily, it's still around because it was at the danger of shutting down a while ago, where we can show off our apps and get feedback from users there and ask for advice and figure out what all those users that rely on something like VoiceOver deal with day to day. And again, make sure that you share these findings, that you share these learnings that you get through talking to your users. All right, so we all built things for Apple platforms, and Apple's pretty cool, you know? And they do everything right. Right? Well, we can learn a lot from them. They do a lot for accessibility. They have great accessibility. But it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work of culture. But even there, and especially at the scale at Apple, scaling that to work for all their apps that they build and all their services is still really hard. So Adam talked about golf and skiing. I feel that accessibility is a little bit like skiing. You'll go downhill, and it's up to you and how safe, but you should do it in a safe way. Wear your helmet. And then you have to take the lift when you get to the bottom, and you need to go back up, and it takes long, and it's cold. And that's kind of what it's like to not do accessibility. Because the longer we take to get started, the more we'll need to reinvest later to figure out how to kind of build up to get back to a proper level again. All right, so now what? As for all of you, go out there, start somewhere, share those learnings with your colleagues, with your friends online, get the ball rolling, and kind of start yesterday. Even though it will be like pushing a boulder up a hill, because that's what it will feel like. And few, if any, people are going to allow you to rest a bit whilst pushing this up. And that's accessibility over and over, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because it's also an interesting challenge. And as you get success, as we heard Antoine talk about indie, it's about failures, it's about learning. You won't get there in one go. So go and make a mark. And leave the world better than we found it. Like we do with code, I hope. We do it for others, like our coworkers. But hopefully, and maybe even more importantly, we do it for our future selves. And I promise you won't regret the effort. It is worth it, over and over again. Speaking of over again, so we transfer, right? They got acquired about 2 months ago, and then they did a layoff. So if you want any help building an accessibility culture, hit me up. And I don't know what will remain of the accessibility culture we build at WeTransfer, but things go on, and I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish there. So never stand still. Start today, start yesterday, do a little bit at a time, and you will need to keep going. Because if you drop the ball, if a colleague builds a new feature that isn't accessible, that might break your experience for those users. And also the obligatory watch reference for James. I believe in you. You can do this. And so hopefully we've just built maybe the start of an accessibility culture, or many accessibility cultures. And I count on you. And if you want, come up to me after this presentation. There is a break. I'll try to set up the seats up from where you checked in. And I'm happy to take a look at your app and kind of see where we can find some accessibility issues and improve them whilst we're at it. Thank you very much.